I'd like to call the meeting to order. The Board of Leavenworth County Commissioners. I'd like to invite everyone to stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I'd like to start with a moment of silence, please. Start our roll call. I'll start with Commissioner STIEBEN.
Here.
Commissioner KAAZ.
Commissioner KAAZ is here.
And Commissioner Shimke.
Here.
And Commissioner Smith is present. And Commissioner Culverson.
Here.
All commissioners are present, 2 by phone. We have any administrative business this time, Mr. LOUGHRY?
I believe we have Congressman Watkins on the line. He wanted to call in and just provide a brief update. So I believe he's on the line.
Yes, I'm here.
Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you briefly this morning. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing.
Thank you. So,
All right, well, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and take my 10 or so minutes to talk through some things from my perspective with regards to the pandemic. Do I have the green light?
yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Doug, Jeff, Vicky, Chad, Mike, and I want all of you to feel like you can reach out to me anytime. I happen to know that Mike Stephen has my personal cell number, and I encourage him to share that with each of you, and so we could always be on the same sheet of music. And I've also been talking with Chuck, the Leavenworth County EOC chief, and he's been keeping me a bit up to date about some of the challenges that you all face. And those are formidable, but hopefully the federal government is making life easier. And I'm going to cover going to hit each of these pretty briefly so that I can I can touch them. But it'll be pretty top line, what with no more than 10 minutes or so. We passed the $2 trillion KAAZ Act. The most, I'd say, helpful component of that has been the Payment Protection Program. And in Kansas alone, we've approved just shy of 20,000 loans, 19,915 loans at last count, at $3.3 billion. That's to help strengthen the connection between employers and employees. And those loans turn into grants if certain stipulations are met, stipulations pertaining to retaining employees, using the money for the employees, and not allowing hours or salaries to dip. I would say that we're trying to get more. Most members of Congress, certainly the entire, or darn near the entire Republican side of the aisle, is trying to get more money into that PPP program with unanimous consent as soon as possible, because it looks like we're going to run out later this week. Economic impact payments. These are the checks, are actually direct deposits. $1,200 per qualified adult, $500 per qualified kid. Secretary Mnuchin announced yesterday that nearly 80 million Americans will receive their impact payment by the end of today. I'd also cover getting back to work. This is the $1 trillion question. When to get back to work, when it's safe. Obviously, you guys know as good as me and as good as anybody in the country that we're trying to steer this ship in between the infectious disease aspect of the pandemic and the economic meltdown of the pandemic, the cliff. and we're trying to steer it, and half the time we're steering blind because we're making assumptions based off of models that we now more than ever realize are flawed. Like a lot of scientific models, we're using assumptions, and those assumptions aren't always accurate. So my personal and professional philosophy on it is to decentralize those decision-making authorities down to lower levels, so that because every geography and every group of people is different, and what's best for New York might not be the best for Kansas. What's best for Cherokee County might not be the best for Leavenworth County. And so forth. And so it ought to be done smartly, and perhaps there are intermediate measures. I've heard some smart and logical steps which could make sense that might be outside the scope of this meeting, but talking about perhaps the age of the individuals going back to work, or perhaps the seating in a restaurant and so forth. The different types of companies that can get back online first in kind of a pecking order. And so those are the discussions being had in Congress right now. I would, moving along to, I just briefly want to mention something that I think you should at least hear once is the WHO. The President stopped funding for the World Health Organization contingent upon looking into what many believe has been a severe mismanagement and even a cover-up regarding the spread of the coronavirus. Just so you know, the U.S. taxpayer contributes about $400 to $500 million a year to the WHO, and they seem to have kind of, side with China, who contributes $40 million each year. Supplies. The system. There is national effort, of course, to produce more ventilators. A lot more have come online. The Department of Health has announced 5 new contracts this week for ventilator production under the Defense Production Act. Basically, the biggest takeaway is great, and everybody should be happy to know that everybody in America who has needed a ventilator has got a ventilator. Anybody who has needed a hospital bed has got a hospital bed. That's a heck of an accomplishment, and one that everybody should be proud of. Next, testing. More than 1 million tests have been conducted in the United States. That's more than any other country. Just earlier this week, Monday, I believe, University of Rutgers, it has developed a saliva collection test that was granted emergency use authorization by the FDA. This test can be self-administered in a healthcare type setting. That reduces the exposure to the medical healthcare workers. It's also faster and also saves on PPE. Therapeutics and vaccines. All the agencies, NIH, CDC, FDA, they're working to validate several antibody tests. Those are underway. The progress has been good. And in recent days, the administration has deployed 28 million doses of hydroxychloroquine from the national stockpile. And so that covers the main part of the federal response very briefly. Happy to field. I've got a couple minutes left of my allocated time, so I'm happy to field a question or two, if that's prudent.
That is. Does that?
And also, I'd also encourage everybody to reach out and call my office, call me personally, or call my office with further questions. But I stand ready to answer any questions you have right now.
Commissioners have any questions for the Congressman?
Congressman, this is Commissioner Shimke. We've had a couple of letters go out more recently. One, I wanted to just double check that you received it, and two, if you had any updates or thoughts. And those 2 letters were specific to property taxes. We've obviously got a lot of questions from residents, taxpayers, that those are going to be due next month. As you know, many fees, deadlines are being delayed, pushed. Even the tax deadline, which was today, has been delayed substantially. That's one of the things that we were we can't control at the county level, and hope to get some state support. So that was one of the letters. The other one was specific to this upcoming election, and given the recommendations from our clerk, our staff, the Clerk Association, that it should and indeed be a mail-in. So any thoughts on either of those, and did you receive both of those letters?
Yes, and thank you. With regards first to the property tax, you know, I know that, and I talk with bankers all the time, and the federal government has been encouraging and urging bankers to not foreclose on property tax loans. No, I mean, a bunch of bankers don't want this property or these companies on their books, and that's just not that's not going to work. The idea in the federal response really is the PPP program, the Payment Protection Program. Those monies can be used to pay for overhead and to pay for their property, which includes taxes. I'm 90% sure that includes taxes for their overhead. And so that's the federal response to it. As for any sort of other tax relief, that would really be at the state level. As for the ballot, I know the election is a big concern. A lot of people who volunteer to work the voting booths are those who are at most risk. These are a lot of times these are retirees. A lot of times there's underlying health conditions, making mail-in ballots logical. Everyone knows that. I think most voters. I think it's safe to say that most voters know that that's an option to them already, and the responsibility of their health lies, in part, of course, with the individual. And I'd encourage anybody who doesn't want to go to a voting booth to do the mail-in ballot. But I'm not in favor of the Democrats' efforts to wedge into part of the next coronavirus bill some sort of voting legislation. They've had a number of proposals, and I don't think that it's actually in the proper spirit of combating coronavirus. So those are my thoughts on it, but I'm certainly open to your guys' thoughts as well.
Well, I realize the election one may be a little bit more political in nature, but the property taxes, my only concern, and I agree with you about all the different programs, including the CARE Act, and thank you for the updates earlier in the call, is, if you're a retired, individual, a lot of what we're talking about is commercial in nature. If you're just a retiree and you pay your property tax in 2 installments, there is no program for that person. And then I think on the commercial side, I think a lot of people have to realize that there's a lot of property owners that aren't necessarily the tenants. So it's the tenants and those businesses that should be and hopefully will be successful in applying for those loans. But that doesn't necessarily, help the property owner. The property owner may not be eligible. They may not have that payroll or that staff. So I think there's a couple of things that have been missed. And I realize when you're talking about something that big that was moved that quickly, it's not going to be perfect. I just thought I'd share those couple of thoughts.
No, I really appreciate you sharing those, and we'll continue to look into that and get smarter on the topics.
I have a question, Doug.
Go ahead, Commissioner Stevens.
Congressman, my sister called me yesterday. She lives down in Newton, and her husband was furloughed 2 weeks ago from an aircraft manufacturing plant. And she yesterday lost her job as a marketing manager. She made $100,000 a year, and he made $75,000 a year. So right there in 2 jobs, that's $175,000 worth of economic impact, and they have 3 children, of course. And I think a lot of our constituents and a lot of people, every week as this goes on, we're starting to hear more and more and more focus on where does the risk of the virus balance with the risk to the economy and to possibly impoverishing our nation and putting us into another Great Depression. So a lot of
folks are focusing on when we can open this economy back up, and we'd rather it be sooner rather than later. So could you kind of address some of those concerns?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We can't have the cure be worse than the problem. And what we're seeing is, obviously, we're realizing very, very serious health and well-being problems associated with economic downturns, massive unemployment leading to suicide. I've heard a stat. I haven't corroborated it, but I get the point of it, and that is every point of unemployment nationally would lead to approximately 10,000 suicides. That's horrifying. Those are war casualties just as much as coronavirus deaths, as far as I'm concerned. And so we can't have the cure be worse than the problem. We need to get back to work quickly and smartly. That's definitely the focus and the goal of the president. He does have his infectious disease experts advising him. But he also has his economic advisors as well. So for every Fauci, there's a Mnuchin up there. And so, as for this particular situation with regards to your relatives, your friends, huge problem, and their employer likely wouldn't qualify for the PPP, and that's why the 238, like it's April 9th, last week, the Federal Reserve announced the creation of the Main Street Business Lending Program, and this is for borrowers with in the business with up to 10,000 employees, or up to $2.5 billion in 2019 annual revenues, and it's designed for loans that are up to, I believe it's $1 to $150 million, and that they mature in 4 years. And so we are focusing on mid and larger sized companies here. It hasn't just been PPP for small companies. We also have the Federal Reserve Main Street Lending facility for your larger companies, and so hopefully that will apply to their employers. They can get back on the books and again strengthen that relationship between employer and employee.
Any other questions of the congressman? All right. Thank you for taking your time.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, gentlemen, and Vicki. Again, please feel free to reach out anytime. I definitely am always interested in hearing your concerns and recommendations, and definitely get my contact information from Mike if you don't have it already. It's been a real joy joining with you, and to continue to keep up the good work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to visit with us. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Okay.
I think the next on the phone would be Brett Sebastian. He is the state director for Go Rail, and we discussed this last week. It's the Staggers Rail Act. So, Mr. Sebastian, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me this morning. Obviously, a little bit of a different circumstance. I think mostly we're used to trying to meet in person for these types of things, but obviously our changed circumstances have forced a little bit of something different. But I appreciate you all inviting me and taking the time out of your schedule to consider this, especially amidst everything else that's going on. Commissioner Stieben told me that everyone should have the Staggers letter before them, but I do want to give a little bit of background on kind of where this project is coming from and why we feel in the freight rail industry that there's a need for this kind of outreach. Really, this project started before all of the coronavirus pandemic began. The internal discussions throughout the course of March, we decided that we do want to go ahead and pursue the completion of this letter to the Surface Transportation Board. The goal is to send it by the end of the summer. I think we're looking at an August 1st deadline. But the basic premise behind it is it's designed to engage with as many stakeholders across the country, elected officials, chambers of commerce, economic development corporations, rail suppliers, anyone with some skin in the game towards the national freight rail system, and build up that support for the 40th anniversary for the Staggers Rail Act. And for those of you who are not familiar with this piece of legislation, it is effectively the freight rail industry's version of deregulation, pretty similar to the one that the aviation industry went through at about roughly the same time. Before it was signed into law, the industry was actually operating on a series of rules, laws, and regulations that had some of them even had their foundation in the 19th century. So the freight rail industry was heavily regulated by the federal government. At the time, it was the Interstate Commerce Commission. They were setting rail rates for any number of pieces of cargo that the freight rail system would actually carry. It prevented the railroads from selling off unprofitable lines, and it really created a situation where after World War II, when you had other technologies coming online, such as the automobile, the aviation industry, the states paving deeper into their territory, so there was far more impetus for people to use the trucking industry or their own personal automobiles. The railroads were still operating in an 1800s playing field. And it put the system, as you are all familiar with as county commissioners, infrastructure requires a certain amount of investment every single year, or your infrastructure is going to start crumbling. And that's true for privately held infrastructure as well. So over the course of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the freight rail system became, quite frankly, very unsafe and ineffective. There was a slew of mergers about this time as companies were having rolling bankruptcy. The passenger rail system evaporated more or less about the 1960s, which is where you begin seeing the development of Amtrak, which was supposed to be a temporary, almost kind of federal holding agency before it could reprivatize, something that has not happened. But the system itself was just not in a great place up until about 1980, when the Staggers Rail Act was passed through Congress. This is actually Jimmy Carter's last act that he signed before leaving office, and it really undid a lot of those 19th century rules and regulations. Railroads could sell off unprofitable lines now. They could enter into free market negotiations with their shippers to set their own individual rates, and you saw the industry really begin to stabilize over the course of the next 15 years. Now we have about eight major Class 1 railroads. The ones in Kansas are BNSF, Union Pacific, and Kansas City Southern has a little bit of portion in the state with its headquarters in the Kansas City area. But then there has also been a proliferation of smaller short lines. In total, there's about 600 or so railroads across the country, most of which are going to be short lines facilitating a niche business. The best example I have is all of the short lines out in western Kansas that really work to facilitate harvest. So over the last 40 years, with this piece of legislation, the railroads have been able to engage in a bit of a freight rail renaissance. They put a little bit over $700 billion back into their lines. The last number I have is $710 billion. They have, the investment itself has actually allowed the system to become significantly more safe. There's been an 80% decrease in accident rates. And the railroads themselves really facilitate all kinds of shipping and commerce across the country. About 30%, actually I want to say close to 40% of international trade moves at one point on the railroads. And efficiency and volume on the railroads has doubled since 1980. And more interestingly, rates themselves have actually decreased since 1980, because as the systems become more efficient, it has actually allowed the railroads to be able to decrease what they would normally charge. So with about 40 years of data under our belt, the idea that we would like to have this year on the 40th anniversary of this piece of legislation is to engage with yourselves, engage with as many stakeholders as possible, and send this letter here at the end of the summer to the Surface Transportation Board, which is now the federal regulating entity for the freight railroads, and remind them that this piece of legislation has had a tremendous impact, not just on the freight rail system, but on communities across America. It's had tremendous economic benefit. It's put people to work. It's created investment. It's created jobs. It is actually saving customers costs when you're talking about shipping goods over long haul, and it's actually a pretty green industry because the average train takes about 300 or so tractor trailer trucks off the road, and that also translates to taxpayer savings because the freight rail industry is wholly privately owned, privately operated, and privately maintained, whereas other shipping happens on surface transportation, which ties back to the taxpayer. So I sent this letter to Commissioner Stieben, I believe about 2 weeks ago or so. He was nice enough to invite me onto this call to kind of state my case, explain where this is coming from, what this project is. Happy to entertain any questions y'all might have about it, Go Rail, or any other freight rail related issues, but I do hope that y'all will consider joining us in this effort and signing on to the letter. And I guess I'll pause there for a moment. I think if I'm getting towards the end of my time, and answer any questions y'all might have.
Does any of the commissioners have any questions on the Staggers Rail Act?
I just have one question. Are you wanting the county commission itself to join in as far as a resolution, or are you wanting each commissioner to sign on to the letter as individuals?
I think probably individually would make the most sense, just because we are trying to put individual names on there, but it depends on what y'all are most comfortable with, obviously.
Okay. For the record, that was Commissioner Stevens asking that question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Any other questions?
This is Commissioner KAAZ. I understand having individual signatures, but I think that as a Board of County Commissioners, a signature page that has all of our signatures as the commission would be more effective than an individual signature just as an individual citizen.
If that's the direction that y'all are most comfortable with, and you think that makes the most impact, I mean, I'm the one who's coming to y'all asking for signatures. So, however y'all would like to go about it, I'm happy to facilitate either individually or done as a resolution with the entirety of the board.
Okay.
For the record, I've had both. I've had individual county commissioners sign on to a similar letter in 2017, and I have a few other counties that are considering joining as a whole via a resolution. So it just kind of depends on the individual county and what everyone's individual preferences are.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to visit with us on this, and we'll get back to you soon on this.
I appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions on this individual project, or if there's ever anything I could help with any other freight rail related issues, I believe everyone has my email. Commissioner Stieben has my cell phone. Please feel free to get in touch with me if there's ever anything I can help with. And with that, I'll jump off, and I hope y'all have a great rest of the day. Thank you for taking the time.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Next administrative business.
On that one, just to follow up on that, if the board wanted to approve that letter or sign it, you could. We could put it on an agenda where you vote on it. You could vote on it today to go ahead and approve it, and then everybody sign off on it. It's however you wish to proceed with it. I think Commissioner KAAZ's suggestion that maybe all of your signatures be on the same document is valid. That's how we typically would do it. So we could just edit the document or have Mr. Sebastian provide us with an edited document that allows for that.
Perhaps we should get an edited document and put it on the agenda.
We'll reach out to Mr. Sebastian, have him provide that, and put it on hopefully next week's agenda if we can get it in time from him.
Okay. All right.
I have a few other items under administrative business. One, Commissioner KAAZ had asked if I could just touch base a little bit on when we start to open things back up, how that transition might work. And I think we've spoke on this before, but similar to how we went into some of our current public health restrictions, I would imagine that as we back off from those in the future, whenever that date may be, it would be a similar, just in reverse. So I think if everybody remembers, this first went into place, they limited to social gatherings to 250, then it went to 50, and then down to 10. Albeit that was a very quick transition. I would assume that when we transition back out, we would then go from the 10 back to the 50, back to the 250, probably in a more extended timeline than as we went into it with. But those are all discussions that will be held throughout the metro and throughout the state. We're currently not there. We believe that, well, currently the state's order, the governor's order carries through until May 1st. Our order is in effect until April 23rd. So as we get closer to those dates, we would expect a reevaluation of the situation each time, and any changes would be made at that time versus trying to do something now when we don't have all the numbers until next week. So,
Mark, I just had a question on that, and I know we've had a few conversations about it as well. While I think that all makes perfect sense, and I know that obviously all of our subject matter experts are engaging with those of Greater Kansas City and the Core 4, and all those meetings are happening, that doesn't necessarily always mean the best ideas come to fruition. So I'm not trying to be critical. One of my questions are, and I think we would ramp up similar to how we ramp down. Sometimes numbers are a little bit arbitrary, and having 10 people in 1,200 square feet is very different than having 10 people in 12,000 square feet. So I don't know if there's been any dialogue yet or discussion about formulas where social distancing and CDC best practices and things like that could still be deployed, but not just pick a number because it's a number, but actually use a formula behind it, because I think how Walmart and Sam's are treated is probably different from how a much smaller 1,200 square foot business might be treated. So,
yeah, I think actually that we have had conversations along those lines, and the numbers that come out are actually CDC numbers. So the 250, the 50, the 10, those were all CDC numbers because they feel like from a safety standpoint that provides the most protection. As we ramp back up, using those same numbers, again, the reason I say that those would be the numbers is because they came from the CDC. As far as your discussion about square footage, so your ability to actually provide adequate social distancing, I think you're seeing some of that in this last order, actually, where they say, Walgreens, if you want to be open, you need to make sure that your customers are at least 6 feet apart while they're in there. If they're standing in line, they have to have the X's on the floor. I think that kind of social distancing is going to stay in place probably throughout the summer, would be my guess. That doesn't mean that those businesses wouldn't open back up necessarily. It's just they're going to have to provide that amount of area for social distancing. And I don't know if there's an actual calculation you can use, because you go in some of the small shops and they have wall-to-wall shelves, or their shelving systems are real tight, whereas you go into like a Sam's Club and the aisles are super wide, and it's easier for that. So based on square footage, I think it's a tough calculation. I think it's just going to be more of a guidance of you have to allow this, you have to have room for it, and if you can't provide that, then you need to limit the number of people in your facility. So again, we're probably we're at least several weeks away, given that the order for the state is in place until May. We're several weeks away before those conversations are held, but we are actually discussing it on a weekly, if not more frequent basis.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, this is Commissioner Stieben. I have a question.
Yes.
Being the fact that some of these businesses possibly could reopen if PPE was provided, I'm thinking of people that are providing haircuts or people that are doing these other things. Like if they had the proper protective kind of mask, they had gloves, those things were available. And as we get towards May 1st, it's possible that we've had a shortage of these items for PPE, but we've drastically ramped up production of those in the country. It's possible by May 1st we'll have availability of the PPE. Is it a possibility that in conjunction with opening we could tie some requirements in that direction.
Well, I wouldn't speak definitively on that because I'm not a subject matter expert, but just first glance, I would say that's not possible because, one, we still have a shortage. We can't get enough PPE for our hospital workers. I was on the phone with my sister-in-law last night, who is actually an emergency room nurse in New York, and they're making them reuse equipment that was never designed to be reused because they can't get enough. I suspect that's not going to change between now and May 1st. That, coupled with the fact that you have to be trained on how to utilize PPE, it's not a put it on in the morning and take it off at night type thing. I seriously doubt that would be an option for the general population. Again, not speaking definitively, but just first glance.
Yeah, that's just a question that's been presented to me because a lot of people would like to have a haircut.
I hear you.
So just because that question has come up in regards to the orders of Leavenworth County versus the state. So early on, obviously, we said, hey, this is something that's going to be managed locally for a lot of reasons because you can't treat the most western counties the same as you treat the most eastern and dense counties. So
Right.
Are we saying that there's nothing that necessarily the county has to do between the 23rd when our initial orders would lift and say the state's on May 1st? Because I thought we kind of...
Potentially, yes, there would be. Our regulations are more restrictive currently than what the state has put out that
Right.
are going to affect. Their order's going to affect on the 20th, or the 18, I think that was the last order that the governor put out. It goes into effect on the 20th. Ours stays in effect until the 23rd. Ours is more restrictive, so it rules. That's the way this last order came out. If they don't change that, we need to evaluate before the 23rd on whether we're comfortable with what the state has put out. I suspect that the state will change 2 to 3 times between now and then, just given the track record. They did change the projected date for our peak. It went from, I think, the 19th to the 23rd. I think they added 3 days to it because they think it could be out closer to the 26th before we reach our peak. So I think that's going to play into whatever the governor comes out. There's really no reason for us to reconsider our orders now until, one, the state has a chance to decide what they're doing, and 2, we get a little bit closer to the 23rd so that we can see what the numbers are doing before we make a change. It may be that we're comfortable with the state's order at that time, or it may be that we think that we need to maintain our restrictions.
What is this is Commissioner Stieben? What is the date on our emergency order when it expires?
The emergency order was effective for, I believe, 90 days. I don't recall the date off the top of my head, Commissioner. I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
And that was the emergency declaration you're referring to, not our county-wide stay-at-home order, which is effective until the 23rd of April.
My only last comment would just be, and I think the congressman alluded to it, there's obviously been a lot of bad information shared, and there's been a lot of mistakes made, and that goes all the way up. So I won't be shy about picking on the World Health Organization or the CDC or the state or the federal government. So I just think it's really important for us to, one, utilize every subject matter expert and resource we have, but make decisions that are also best for us and not, specific to what just the Core 4 is doing. And I'm not saying what they did was wrong. I'm also not saying it was perfect, and it's not meant to be when you're talking about public health. But there's a lot of comparisons being made to places like New York and others. And there was a report more recently that actually showed resources per capita by state. And, the reality is Missouri is number 1, Kansas is number 2. So I think people have to realize that while there may be more hospitals in New York than there is in Kansas, there's not more hospitals or beds or ICU units per person. So it all gets down to a per capita and per person. I think those things are, one, important for the public to know, because that's great. That's where you want to be. You want to have a lower population and lots of resources for it if you had a choice for when someone's getting sick. So I also, if someone could educate me on this real quick, because, of course, on the news, all you see is the tents and the chaos. We've talked a lot about like the dark store theory. Does anybody not think there's like millions of empty warehouses and square feet available that already have electrical and HVAC and resources that would be very easy to commandeer and turn into hospitals if they need be? Or would that not have the same political effect?
No, I think.
This is Commissioner KAAZ. Actually, the state of Missouri and the state of Kansas have put out looking for the different contractors to address just what you're talking about, Commissioner Shimke. They're looking at using shuttered hospitals, the potential for, or buildings that might be able to be used if the need were to arise in Kansas or Missouri.
Well, I think that's great. I'm suggesting I think the likelihood is very low that would ever come to the Midwest, but I still can't figure out why in places that are so densely populated that have millions and millions of square feet of empty buildings, why they would have chose that direction or strategy, but I thought maybe something.
I believe the state had a plan, was it a week ago Friday on that conference call about abandoned or nursing homes and hospitals that were not being used anymore, about reopening if they had to do that. This week's call, and I was not able, and Commissioner KAAZ was going to take that conference call, but 10 minutes after it was supposed to start, they sent out an email about a different code number you had to punch in, so we both missed it. So hopefully next Friday, they have one every Friday to give an update on what the state's doing. So hopefully you'll be able to listen in on that one. So, anything else before we move on?
I do have just a few other items. I had a lot today. I apologize for that.
That's fine. That's what we're here for.
One, I just want to touch base, and I know sometimes we go into executive sessions for these things, but I feel like, especially now, if we can discuss these in public, and there's no reason to not. Council on Aging building, there was a lot of discussion before we closed down about what was going on. We did look at the second site. We did an evaluation on it. I believe I've briefed the board, but I think it's fine to discuss it, that the second site was also had challenges, and we do not believe it's viable at this time. So we are still in the search for a building that would meet our needs. There was another one submitted, but the square footage was just not adequate, and the person that we've been working with trying to identify locations is still searching, looking for other opportunities. We reached out, as we discussed, and got just some rough estimates on what a new construction might look like. The estimate is between $4 to $4.5 million to build new, and that would be with including furnishing and whatnot. So that's an option. It's not one that we're prepared to present just yet, but I do think that's something that the board would have to consider if we're going to move forward versus dumping $2 to $3 million into a 70 or 60-year-old building. It might be worthwhile. The challenge with that, obviously, is funding. So we don't have $4.5 million laying around to build a new building. You cannot issue debt like bonds without an election in the state of Kansas. So that would be one thing to consider. You may have to put it out for a special question if we wanted to go that route. Or you could do a lease purchase, but those are usually abbreviated in length. When I talked to our local bank, they thought that 10 years would be the furthest out you could go on something like that. So you're looking at a $500,000 basically per year payment. If you do bonding, you would probably be looking at about a $250,000 a year payment for something along those lines. So just wanted to put that out. It's not on the agenda. There's no reason to take action. It's just kind of an update on where we're at.
Since you brought that up, Mark, I think it's important to mention again, I'm getting still inundated with a lot of phone calls and emails. I just want everybody in the public to know we are not trying to shut the Council on Aging agency down. Quite the opposite. Right. We're basically wanting to enhance what they have already and recognize that they're an important part of the county services. So anybody that thinks we're trying to shut the county or the county Council on Aging down, that's not the case. We're just trying to save the taxpayers money by not paying a rent anymore for the building. That's the whole goal of this. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that.
That's exactly right. We're trying to enhance what we're doing, not detract from. and that we're trying to make sure that we're putting our money into something that's sustainable versus something that's going to continue to grow in maintenance issues.
And I'll just remind everybody that going into 2021, any type of additional payment, whether it's $250,000 or $500,000, there's a good chance that we're going to have a budget shortfall of millions. So just keep that in mind, given the current state of where we are. So,
Sure. I think that's very that's accurate estimation. I don't know about the total dollar amount yet, but there will obviously be an impact to revenues for all governmental entities.
Well, Council on Aging especially, because they have a big annual fundraiser usually coming up about this time of the year, I believe.
They do have one in the summer, they do especially. So, I mean, anything like that is going to be restrictive. That's really not part of their operating budget, though.
Right.
That's just special expenditures that they use.
But it's still monies that's
Right.
that's used in Council on Aging.
Yep. Sorry, was there anything else on that? I still have two other items on administrative business. One is, as we are addressing our own staffing issues here in the county, we've been very fortunate that we've been able to keep most of our employees on and engaged in work. However, there have been a few positions that, just due to the nature of the job, we cannot keep them, I guess, fully employed. So we are looking at furloughing a few positions. It's on a case-by-case situation within departments. It's not something that we're looking at doing on a mass basis. Basically, a few of the departments have reached out and said these positions we could furlough. One of the things that I've looked at the federal and state level is that when they're furloughing employees because of the nature of the furlough and the nature of the coronavirus, they're offering to cover the health insurance premiums for those employees while they're off, because typically we would withhold their share out of their paycheck. Well, they're not going to be drawing a paycheck, so not only would we be furloughing them, we would also be requiring that they continue to pay out of their own pocket. I wanted to approach the board and see if there was, if you would have any issue if we would offer to pay, cover their insurance while these employees are furloughed. And again, it's not a mass situation. It's having them on furlough saves the county money anyways. So I would like to offer that up there. I just wanted to make sure that the board would not take exception to that.
No.
This is Commissioner Stephen. I have a question, Mark, about that. How many of those positions, if the economy opens up, would be then recalled?
We would anticipate that all of them would be, as long as soon as the buildings are open to the public and we uptick back to where we were in people coming in and conducting business with the county. I would anticipate that they would all be recalled.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner KAAZ. I would have no issue with the county covering the health care costs.
I wouldn't either. Because they're eligible for unemployment, and we all know that that's not happening fast.
Do you need a motion on that, or is that consensus?
Well, I think that administratively I can do it. I just wanted to make sure before we did that there wasn't a lot of pushback from the board. Obviously, didn't want to create a problem trying to resolve a smaller problem.
No, I think everybody's always in support of doing what's best for the employees. It's just always challenging to sit here and realize that as a governmental entity, we have a better ability to do those things than a lot of the private businesses right now that would love to do the same thing but can't. So that's the only reason for pause. So
absolutely. Okay, so I will work with the county clerk and make sure that we address that with the employees who are going to be furloughed or are already furloughed. Last thing, I promise, just CARE Act funding. I sent some emails around yesterday. Looks like the state of Kansas will be receiving approximately $1.25 billion from the CARE Act. That's to be filtered down to local government and entities at a certain percentage. The larger counties in the state, that would be Sedgwick and Johnson County, they have the ability to apply directly to the federal government for their share of the funding. And I think I shared the calculation with you. I've also shared that with the cities in case they weren't aware of it. Unfortunately, we can't do that. We're not a large enough county, so we have to rely on the state to follow through with trickling those funds down to us. And this is to cover expenditures that are related to COVID-19. I would like to, and we can draft letters, but I think it sometimes has more value if each of you individually contact our representatives and weigh in on this, but we can also draft a letter and send it. I would like that the state consider providing us with the same level of funding that the larger counties are able to do directly through the federal government. I don't know that every entity would have the ability to take advantage of it. One of the restrictions is you have to have a case of COVID-19, so some counties so far wouldn't even be eligible. But typically, we've struggled with getting money out of the state once they get it, even though it was specifically intended for local level government at about 45% based on population. It'd be about 45% of what the state receives. So they would still retain 55% of everything they get, plus you have to have actual expenditures, so they'll probably end up keeping 70 to 80% of what they get anyways. I just would like to start putting a little pressure on them to treat us like Johnson County and Sedgwick County are treated.
Okay. So you think the state would keep more than just administrative costs to get the money out?
I think the last time there was funding available like this, about 23% of it, I think, is the number that they've provided. 23% came back to the local government entities, and they kept, therefore, 77%. So I suspect it will be a similar situation again. However, we do have expenditures that are COVID-19 related, and we also have expenditures that are at risk of not being able to happen because of the reduction in revenue that we're seeing because of the COVID-19 as well. And so I think it's important that money that was intended to come to the local governmental entities actually gets to us. And I would like to see it at the same rate that the Johnson County and Sedgwick County communities have the ability to do.
Mark, I wanted to first thank you for putting that together because it was incredibly enlightening. I think it's a no-brainer that we should reach out to all of our representatives. I think a letter doesn't hurt.
Right.
So I think we should do both. It also helps us to speak a little bit more intelligently about, the numbers and the true impact.
Yeah. No, I definitely will do.
One of the questions I had per your email, though, was, so many of these programs have been, payroll specific and expense specific and not income related. So those two things are very different. And so in our case, it's the income, the receivables that are going to be impacted. And while I know we have obviously COVID cases and COVID expenses, those are nil in comparison to the loss of income. And how does that all work, or do we know yet relative to those funds?
So from the federal guidelines, you cannot use it to replace revenue specifically. But what you can do is use it to pay for projects that would have been funded with that revenue. Okay. So if we have a project that, let's just say a sales tax related project that we were planning on having completed in this year or next year fund-wise, and for whatever reason, because sales tax collections are going to be down, we could no longer afford to do that project. We could fund that project with these funds. So you can't do we lost $1 million in revenue, so we're going to use $1 million of this to offset revenue, but we can use it to say we're going to pay for that project because we no longer have the revenue to do it.
Right. So
it's that's in the reading of the legislation that they put together. And when they adopted this, I think Congressman Watkins even referenced that they put it together pretty quick and they put it out, so it wasn't a perfect legislation. Some of the guidelines that have come out since then are interesting, and that was kind of one of the ones that I didn't understand as to why they wouldn't allow you to replace revenue at the government level, but that is one of the things we cannot do. We have to have an expenditure.
Okay. Thank you.
We got projects we can assign it to.
We definitely have projects that we were going to fund with sales tax that will now be at risk because our sales tax collections will be down.
Right.
Okay. I'll reach out, and like I said, if we haven't put together a letter,
we'll draft a letter and put it on next week. it will be real brief. I mean, 1 page at the most, I think, will cover what we need to talk about. And I think it would be good also to share that with our, at the federal level too, with like Congressman Watkins and maybe Senator Roberts, Senator Moran, because they're pushing this money down. I think they could maybe get some stipulations on there that it go to the entities that it was really earmarked for.
Well, I did want to quickly thank Senator Holland. So he did respond. Obviously, he received those letters and was pushing our initiatives forward. So definitely want to thank him. I'm not saying the other ones aren't. They just haven't necessarily acknowledged receipt. So
that was all I had.
Mark, I had one follow-up from last week's meeting.
That's Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, Commissioner Stevens
Okay.
here. I looked up on the KDHE website, and this is just to kind of keep things in perspective and hopefully to reinforce that the social distancing and what people are doing is potentially working. Between October and now, the Kansas residential pneumonia and influenza-related deaths in Kansas was 1,192, and the deaths from the coronavirus in Kansas has been a total of 69. So I think that reinforces, let's keep up what we're doing, but let's get ready to fire up this economy before too long. And we just appreciate everything that the community's done and that Jamie and the health professionals have done. And hopefully when we peak this out, we can help to recover this. But we've only had 1 death in Leavenworth County, and we can be thankful for that.
Anything else?
I just wanted to point out, I think Mark's got a good point that we all need to reach out to our state reps on this, because from past experience, we know the state is keeping our LAVTR money. It's about $1.8 million every year. And also they intercept 80% of the pilot check for the school district from Fort Leavenworth. That's about $250,000 a year. So I think it's important that we do reach out and voice our opinion on this to them.
We can lower the mill levy.
Yes, we could.
Okay. All right. Then we'll move on. Consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look at the consent agenda? Is there anything that needs to be pulled out or voted on separately? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner KAAZ votes aye.
Commissioner Stevens votes aye.
All right. Thank you.
I was trying to find just a point of clarification. So there were multiple, and I know we've had a number of meetings with the sheriff, but multiple Motorola expenses. And I don't know why I was assuming there would be 1 versus 2, but obviously they were sizable. Is that exactly what we anticipated? I know we had lots of discussions as far as how they might be able to finance this over time and at what rate, and obviously it's a pretty big expense for us to be taking on at the county. So.
Yeah, so some of the expenditures you see are our normal ongoing operations, the maintenance that we pay them, and then the other ones are because of this project. And they'll bill us in phases. They did agree to, I think it's 3 years, if I recall. But yeah, so some of the expenditures you see are normal Motorola operational expenditures.
Just the ongoing, okay, versus the larger capital.
Yep.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the Port Authority appointments, I should say. We have 2 appointments on the county.
Commissioners, you have 5 applicants for the 2 openings that the county has to fill on the Leavenworth County Port Authority. All of the cities have filled their openings at this time. You do have kind of a poll sheet at your place. I think Commissioner Stieben may have one, and then Commissioner KAAZ will need to, I guess, figure out how you want to let us know who you vote on. You can either do that via phone, or if you'd like, you could. I can call you, however you want to handle that, Commissioner KAAZ.
Oh, it doesn't make any difference to me.
I think,
whatever it is.
yeah, I think it would be easiest if you wouldn't mind just to say over the phone, announce who it is that you are, that you would like to support for that. The other commissioners, if you want to, just mark it on your sheets and hand it to me like we've done in the past, then I'll tally it up and then we'll get a motion for 2 positions.
Yeah, you have to vote for 2. Does anybody want to discuss any of the applicants and their qualifications? All very qualified.
I think they are very qualified, all of them. I just
All of
wanted to
them are.
mention that I actively recruited Bill Mason. I don't know if you guys are very familiar with him, but I know you've all met him. He's at every comp plan meeting we have and a lot of the different meetings we have on just about any issue at the county level, especially when it involves economic development.
So we got this 2 right now in the southern part and 3 in Leavenworth Lansing. So I'd like to see at least 1 more in the southern part of the county, but that's why we vote. And 1 more in the city of Lansing, Leavenworth Lansing area. Go ahead, Commissioner KAAZ.
Yes, this is Commissioner KAAZ. I would also consider a little bit of diversity, so I'll put it out there that I would support just upfront Pamela Burton, and then also Douglas Shimke. Those would be the 2 that I would have
Okay.
support for.
I recognize that name.
So I was going to share. So I had 2 recruitments here. So Dirk Hoagland was one that I had has actually been in front of this board before with the Livestock Association, but very diverse background. Has worked in the private sector. Now currently owns and operates J&N Ranch. Someone who's lived all over the world rather than maybe just here locally. I thought that's a very different perspective that would be helpful. And then also Douglas Shimke, who I am related to be clear. He actually had contacted me several weeks ago about the opportunity. He had a chance when he was managing and running CMOP to work very closely with the Port Authority, so has a good understanding of how that works, and thought he'd be able to provide some good insight. So those were the 2 applicants specific to me. So.
Okay, yeah, if he worked at CMOP, he definitely knew how that worked because we actually funded that, annual payment. So, Commissioner KAAZ had mentioned, I believe Pam Burton, she's an attorney. That does bring something to the board also. Everybody needs an attorney. Seems like. On
David,
board.
That seems contrary to everything we've said up to this point.
Commissioner Smith, I concur with your statement.
Yeah.
And I just reiterate what Jeff said. I think it's a great group with a lot of experience. So.
Everybody's got a lot of experience. Mr. Matthews brings a lot of experience through what he's went through the county planning commission. I don't know, is that any kind of a conflict? Someone on the planning commission being on the Port Authority also? Could there be a conflict on that?
Commissioner Smith, members of the commission, again, and this is David Van Harris, there's always the potential for conflict. Until an actual conflict is identified, I think that's
right. You
really
just have to
in the world of conjecture.
Anything that would come up, you just have to recuse himself.
If there were to be a conflict.
If there was a planning and zoning issue that was out in the county.
Well, obviously, if the Port Authority proposed a development that required approval by the Planning Commission, that could lead to a conflict.
Yeah. And it just would have to be, he would just have to recuse himself of anything on the Planning Commission.
Oh, very likely might have to recuse himself from both.
Okay, well, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, any,
Commissioner KAAZ here. I just wanted to also say that I agree we had some incredibly qualified applicants in this round of applications for the Port Authority.
okay. Yeah, I agree. I wish we could place them all on there. They're very qualified.
Would the commissioners like to mark the poll that you have and give it to me, and then I'll tally if you'd like?
That'd be fine. I haven't even done it yet. I'm still looking. Oh, I think I wrote all my notes on it.
I did too. We can get them back.
Yeah, I wrote all my notes when I was talking to the congressman, and staggers real. I got a pad right here I should use. All right, thank you.
Get an extra
All
one.
right.
Take it back.
Okay, Commissioners, we do have one clear selection. That was Douglas Shimke. He received 4 votes. Then we had Pamela Burton and Dirk Hoagland, each received 2 votes. Bill Mason and John Matthews each received 1 vote. So if we'd like to move Douglas Shimke on, then if you could do one more time of voting and just select 1 this time. And if we could limit it to either just Pam Burton and Dirk Hoagland, since they had 2 votes, or you could do either of the other 4, I guess. It just depends. So if you have additional, do you guys have additional voting tablets?
I've got additional paper that'll do the trick.
Right.
Okay. All right. I have more. I definitely have.
Mr. Shimke's in the southern part of the county. Okay.
Commissioner KAAZ, I think your initial one was Pam Burton. Is that the one you would like to?
Yes.
Okay. Your phone is giving us feedback.
Bill and Chris, I think we're going to have to get a paging system involved up here. I said we've got to get a paging system involved. I hate taking a couple hours more than we have to of your productivity away.
For this?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Okay, Commissioners, after the second round, Pam Burton received 2 votes and Dirk Hoagland received 3 votes. So if you'd like to make a motion to appoint Douglas Shimke and Dirk Hoagland to the Leavenworth County Port Authority as representatives of Leavenworth County, that'd be appropriate.
I'll make a motion to appoint Dirk Hoagland and Douglas Shimke to the Port Authority of Leavenworth County.
Have a motion, to have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the Port Authority appointments? Voting?
I have a question for the county councilor, Mike Stieben.
Go ahead.
Do these two representatives on the Port Authority serve at the pleasure of the commission? Meaning, if the commission determined that we did not want them to continue, we could do so at any time? Or is it just a appointment and they serve their term and that? What's our authority here?
Commissioner Stieben, members of the commission, these appointments are for a term. The order in which they are appointed, we may need to look at, because some terms are for 4 years, some terms are for a shorter period. Since they have a term of office, technically they would fulfill that term of office once they take the oath. At the same time, and I've brought this issue before this board on past occasions, in the event that for some reason you disagreed with the actions taken by your representative, you certainly can consult with them either after the action, which I would suggest may not be as productive as discussing it with your representatives prior to action. So an interactive approach, I think, would reduce the likelihood or even the possibility of conflicts between what the board would prefer to see develop out of the Port Authority and what any particular representative would endorse.
Thank you.
Okay, any other further discussion? Then voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner KAAZ votes aye.
Commissioner Stieben votes aye.
Thank you. All right. All right, we're ready for the public comment policy. Everybody had a chance to look that over? Any questions, concerns?
I think Commissioner Stieben had one concern on here, and that he has expressed to me, and it's a valid point, but I'm not sure how I get around it, and that is that we're asking people to turn their public comments in on Friday, which is the same day the agenda comes out, so there may be something on the agenda they're not aware of that then they want to provide a comment for. But if we're going to have them provide it in writing, and it's going to go out in the packet, I was hoping to get it before we send the packets out. So not sure if that's a concern of the board or how you might propose we address that.
Well, the packet has to go out on Friday.
Preferable, it's not mandatory, but it's definitely preferable to give adequate time for review.
This is Commissioner KAAZ, but isn't it also possible to send an amended agenda if there were to be something that came out before Wednesday?
Just to be clear, to make sure I understand, so again, we publish the packet on Friday. A resident can review it. If they see an item that they want to provide comment on, again, they can submit anything to us ahead of time, but if we're going to limit it to 3 minutes, then really we're going to limit it to 5 people. Is it necessary that we know who those 5 people are up front, knowing that they're going to have the chance to speak at the end of the meeting anyway?
So it really would only impact those things that are on the agenda that we were going to discuss. And again, it comes down to if they're going to provide those things in writing, I need to have those in the packet so that everybody would have access to them. If they're not providing anything in writing, they're just calling in, it's not as crucial that we get that information on Friday, I guess. So I suppose, and yes, Commissioner KAAZ, we could provide an amended agenda if somebody contacted us and weighed in and needed to be placed in the packet. It was just an attempt to try to have that as much information as possible in the packet for everyone. I guess it wouldn't be mandatory that information actually be in our packet. We could just circulate it to the board.
This is Commissioner Stieben. I guess the issue is if you're putting the agenda out on Friday, and let's say somebody pulls it up on Saturday and reads the agenda, if the deadline for getting on the comment for Wednesday, maybe they read something on Saturday when they pull it up on the computer, they read it and they say, well, I'd like to make a comment on that, but they've missed the deadline because our deadline kind of dovetails with when we're actually putting the agenda out. Maybe if we just extended the deadline for getting on the list to Monday.
They can email over the weekend.
Yeah. So, we would just change that to Monday from Friday.
And they could email anything in over the weekend.
This is Commissioner KAAZ. That works for me.
Okay. So any other comments on this document? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve it with the change.
So moved.
Have a motion to have a second.
Commissioner KAAZ, second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the public comment policy? And
This is Commissioner Stieben. I appreciate the various arguments on this, and it's really not a huge thing, but I think representing my constituents, I think I will be voting against this. I kind of like the status quo. I like what we've been doing, and I don't think, while there potentially are problems, and there possibly were some meetings we had to sit through some longer times, overall I think it's been working. So I'm just going to vote no on this, but it's a friendly no.
Okay. Any further discussion? Now I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Commissioner KAAZ votes aye.
Commissioner Stieben votes no.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Now we have a request for a road improvement project at Stillwell and K32, and the request comes from the Baser Superintendent, USD, is it 458?
Yep.
Commissioners, Mr. Howard with the Baser Linwood School District is on the call. So if we have questions or if you'd like him to present this, he can. Basically, this is a request we received to participate in a road improvement project that is part of a new school, a new elementary school that's being built in the south end of the county at the location you specified.
So Mr. Howard is on the phone at this time?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Good morning, Mr. Howard. How are you today?
Great. Good morning.
All right. You can go ahead at any time.
Okay. The letter was really twofold. I spoke with Mark about this project, and he said it's not one of the current projects that the county is currently considering as far as road improvements. We did select that site, and I know there's been lots of questions about why that site was selected as opposed to rebuilding in Linwood. Part of our issue in Linwood is capacity for water and to meet the Kansas State Fire Marshal's requirement for water flow. So we selected this site. It's actually in the middle of where most of our students live that currently attend Linwood. It would also allow us to pull some students from further north to this new location. We have a request in the KAAZ for a grant to help offset some of those costs to the improvements along K32. And so this request was to see if the county had any funds to help with the improvements along Stillwell Road.
Okay.
Commissioners, if it's okay, I'd weigh
Go
in.
ahead.
Okay. So, and some of this I've discussed with Mr. Howard already. Obviously, K32 is a state highway, not a county route. So, we don't typically participate in funding improvements with that. These improvements are necessitated by the building of the school, and like any other applicant, we would require them to provide the improvements at their cost, not ours. And since it's not a budgeted expenditure or a project that's in our long-range planning, we would have to move funding from one of our other projects that currently is on schedule to assist with this funding. Mm-hmm. So those are the challenges with it. Just wanted you to be aware of those before any decisions made.
No, there's a lot of challenges, and I would like to spend the county's money on upgrading County Road 2 south of their current facilities, from south of I-70 to K32, because if you're going to build a school down there, it's going to be an increased amount of traffic going that way to your new school. And we all know the County Road 2 does need some work, and it was on a project list, I believe, in the early 2000s, and got kicked down the road. It was supposed to begin after the first phase was completed on the northern part of County Road 2, where their current facilities are. So,
I actually just had a question. I apologize, I don't know the answer. So where is the city in this, or any implications to it? So we currently obviously maintain the Stillwell Road component, where K32 is a state highway.
Right.
But I'm usually not too familiar with schools being built outside of city limits, and ultimately cities working closely with the schools rather than the county working closely with the schools. Or am I mistaken?
Well, I think in eastern Kansas, it would typically be the schools would be in the city limits. I think western Kansas, you find a lot of them out in the rural areas because they need to be centrally located. So it's not unheard of. It does provide some challenges to us, but I don't think our discussion is where the school is being located. It's just the improvements that are necessary because of the location of the school. It's outside any city limits, so no city would be responsible for any assistance one way or the other. And I'm not even sure that they would be allowed to participate in an improvement that was outside their city limits.
This is Commissioner Stieben. I have a question for the superintendent.
Go ahead.
Mr. Howard, I got a letter from the city of Linwood, and it's signed by Mayor Brian Christensen, and it says, in part, and the commissioners have this in front of them, the city of Linwood has addressed the board's concerns about water and sewer and are able to accommodate a new elementary school on the existing property. This seems to many of us in the surrounding areas as an unnecessary waste of taxpayer money and unnecessary environmental impact on the proposed build site. So it would seem that Linwood is kind of weighing in on the school district. Was that when your board discussed all this? Did those issues come up?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Commissioner Stieben. I'm right now currently looking at a letter from the city of Linwood that was dated March 20th, 2019. And it came from Karen Kane, the city clerk. And in that letter, she gave 3 bullet points. The first bullet point was that the city does not have the estimated gallons, 1,500 gallons per day, but they do have the sewer system. But they do not, and number 2 says City of Linwood does not have enough water required by the state fire marshal for a 2-hour duration. The existing storage tank that the City of Linwood at this time would be empty within the first hour. So that was, at that point, was the decision that we made to look for property also outside of the city limits that was closer to the water tower, that where we could meet those state fire marshal standards.
Yeah, they provided me also with a letter from Ben Kramer, principal of the Kramer Consulting Engineering Group, and apparently they're saying that they could hook into the Brewer water district there. So really, like Mark said, it's not our, that's you guys' decision totally,
Right.
but there's, we're getting a little pushback, put it that way.
And I get that. I completely understand, and I'm not trying to put you guys in the middle of this, but the request, really there are two parts of the request. One was if there was financial assistance. We wanted to use that in support of the grant that we're requesting from KDOT. And then two, really the support that's saying that, even though it's built in the county, that the county will be able to maintain the road or whatever after improvements are made to it. I understand Linwood, the city of Linwood's concern with this project being outside of their city limits. But again, we were looking, we're looking to build schools due to our growth where our students are currently located. And this site actually, there's only a little over 100 students currently being served at Linwood Elementary. This new site would put this building right in between where our student capacity, where our students are located currently. So again, I get where you guys are coming from. We're not trying to put you in the middle of this, but we just wanted to make sure that we at least asked the question, and we thought it might help us with the grant from KDOT.
Mr. Howard, this is Commissioner Shimke. I forget when you're on the phone, you should probably do that as well.
Yeah.
One, I wanted to congratulate you on all the success that you guys are having at your school, scholastically, academically, obviously the sports team, and what a kind of a heartbreaking end to all of it this year. So realize my question here is not being critical. I think what you guys are doing is really, really great, and hugely supportive of it. We've had a lot of discussions internally, and we get a lot of feedback, as I'm sure you can imagine, on taxes and property taxes in general, and a lot of times that does come back to the schools and the schools' capabilities to control a lot of their funding, oftentimes better than we can. Is this not something as a part of your project that would be covered under the same funding, whether you're going to a vote or whether those funds are already in place? It just oftentimes seems like the schools may have better controls to access the funding that they need than even we do at the county. So again, I don't know the size of the overall project or the cost associated with it, but is it safe to assume that these costs, if it couldn't be supported by the county or that you didn't get the grants, would still be able to move forward?
Yeah, our plan is to move forward regardless. One of the issues we've run into is making off-site improvements. We passed a bond referendum, obviously last, it seems so long ago now, 2018, to build schools. But so sometimes we're limited on what we can spend bond money on, and we start looking at infrastructure that's outside of the building. That's kind of where we run into some issues, because really the bond that was passed was to construct schools, not do infrastructure that's not on our property. We are still looking at ways to accomplish this, but again, I just felt like, we felt like the grant through KDOT, if we had the county's support or showed that the county supported it, or that we at least asked the county if it was a possibility that they would could financially contribute, and if not, maybe just support the overall project of a building there.
Okay. Mr. Howard, this is Commissioner Smith here. I just want to echo what Commissioner Shimke said about the Baser School District. I mean, we all know people are moving to our county and that area because of the Baser School District. I guess I want to answer your question with a question. If what you're asking, if we cannot provide financial support for this Stillwell Road project, if we would support letters to KDOT and on this project, and would you support, or your school board support, a letter if we were to apply for KDOT funding for County Road 2 or 158th Street project?
Thank you for asking that, Commissioner Smith. Absolutely. We understand, the narrow road of County Road 2 and the amount of traffic it has, and understand that we probably contribute to some of that traffic going south, and maybe more so once we have a new elementary school in that area. So absolutely we would support any county proposal to the state stating that they'd like to see that road improved.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Mr. Howard, this is Mike STIEBEN. We sent a letter to the state of Kansas signed by all the commissioners asking that a stoplight, that a study be conducted to put a stoplight in at K32 and 158. Is that something that your board might be willing to weigh in on?
I believe so, absolutely.
Well, I'd appreciate if you'd present that to them. And I think if all this really moves forward, I think, we want to help to grease the skids and make it happen. And I do want to, since everybody's complimenting the school district, my daughter's a senior this year there, and I appreciate everything that you folks have done at Baser Linwood, and I hope we can figure out something special to do for the seniors this year, considering the circumstances.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Commissioner STIEBEN. I will tell you that we looked at property at 158 and K32 for a potential school. We thought that was too far away from, there were two reasons we did. One, it was too far away from Linwood, but two was because of that intersection, and we did not want to create a lot more traffic right there at that intersection, especially without a stoplight. And that hill going back to the east just really makes that a blind intersection. So the school district would absolutely support or submit a letter in support of a stoplight at that intersection.
I appreciate that. Maybe we can put you in touch with our public works and we can kind of coordinate that.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Howard on his request? Mr. Culberson, you're being awful quiet.
I just had a couple of things. This is Commissioner Culberson, Mr. Howard. I wish we had enough money to just say, yeah, this is no problem, but I think I got to resonate what Commissioner Shimke said, is you probably can come up with this money easier than the county can. I think we're probably going to have to focus on some of the fallout traffic issues, like Commissioner Smith is talking about, already in existence because of the existing schools on, like County Road 2, for instance. And as far as a support letter, yeah, I'd be more than happy to supply that. I just have one question, though, about security. Easton, I think, is the only school in the county that's not in a city limit. So your resource officer and security is supplied by all the cities for all the schools except Easton. You're presenting another school be built not in a city limit. So have you already worked out security issues with our sheriff's department as far as security for the students, with as far as resource officer and, in today's world?
Yeah. Really, this would be no different than the current school at Linwood Elementary. Linwood does not have a officer on site or in their city, so the county provides that protection, if you will. So this school would be served in that same capacity. I will also tell you that until probably 3 years ago, Glenwood Ridge and our middle school, our new middle school, were not within the city limits of Baser. We just let them, we just had them annex us about 3 years ago. So the county would continue, law enforcement would continue to support us down there.
Okay. You've talked to Andy about that already?
Yes.
That's the only question I have.
All right. Any other questions, Mr. Howard? All right. Thank you for calling in.
Absolutely. Thank you, and I appreciate everything you guys do and hang in there during these times.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioners, that was on under action item because they did have a formal request, so
We do need a motion.
it sounds like there wasn't support for funding, but the request for the potential letter in support of the project to go to KDOT, if you could provide a direction on that, we can draft a letter and get it out.
Well, I'll entertain a motion on the Stillwell Road project, K32 funding request.
This is Commissioner Stieben. I think I would like to hear, from more constituent input on this before I'd be willing to sign on to that.
That on the commission sending a letter of support for a KDOT application for funding on their project?
Yeah, I'd like to hear. I want to hear from some folks if we could pick that down a week or two.
Well, Mike, just a quick question, and I'm probably the least knowledgeable on the topic, so bear with me, but seems like there was maybe some conflicting information that was being sent or provided as to capacity or ways to work through that. I at least took from that phone call that they've made a decision regardless of what those capacity challenges are or difference of opinion, that the school and that site is moving forward, probably with or without us. Maybe I misunderstood that. I don't see it unwinding as far as site selection, acquiring property, everything that goes along with it. So I would just say, while I don't disagree with you that I think there's some difference of opinion there, I think that if there's anything I've learned since being up here, that when schools make a decision, there's very little to do to alter it, most likely. So I think they are doing a great job there and would be in support of what they're trying to accomplish, just not at the county's expense at this time. So
I'd just like to have an opportunity to hear from a few more folks before I sign on to a letter, if a little more time.
The school already owns the property? School district's already purchased the property, or it's on a contract? Okay. Like I said, I guess entertain a motion to either approve or deny the funding request, and then we could do a separate motion on the letter of support for a KDOT application for funding. Is that what the board would want to do?
I mean, if we were to delay the vote a week to allow Mike to have further discussion, is that gonna, I'm of the opinion things move pretty slow at KDOT anyway. I don't know that that's going to drastically change the timeline of anything.
Okay.
If Mike wants to delay, I think if we voted on it now, the vote would be in support of what they're trying to accomplish without funding. If we make that same decision next week, whether Mike has those conversations or not, does it derail their project? I doubt it. So
I guess that'd be a question for Mr. Knoll.
Well, I believe that, I'm not sure what funding source grant application they're specifically referring to, but if they're referring to the cost share program with KDOT, the deadline for that has been extended to mid-May.
Okay.
And so that's the one that we're going to reach out and put support on and apply for funding on it. And so that's a mid-May deadline. So it's through local projects. That's the only upcoming grant application process.
Mike, are you saying you want extra time so that you know whether you want to support funding this or just a support letter from the county?
Just the support letter. I want to talk to the mayor of Glenwood and talk to a few folks before I sign on to that.
is a week enough time?
That's plenty.
Okay.
Everybody good with just delaying until next week's agenda and we
That's fine
can
with me.
vote?
Okay. Guess we
You
need
need
to
a
have
motion to,
Do we need a motion about the funding part of it? Yeah or nay?
You don't have to make a motion if
We're going to wait anyway.
you're not going to approve it, there's no motion needed.
Okay.
But
Okay.
we can put the letter of support on for next week's agenda.
yeah, I think it'd actually be good to have, if we could even draft it in that
Have it
period of
ready
time,
for
have it to go, ready to go and sign and all that next week when we vote.
we will do that.
Okay.
Mike,
All
you
right.
good?
So,
Yep, that's good.
all right, we'll move on then to planning and zoning. Sorry to keep you waiting, Crystal.
Good morning, Crystal.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. All right, Commissioners, a few weeks ago, we discussed adding some changes to the planning and zoning fee schedule, which the board was largely supportive of. I did need to make a couple of changes to our zoning and subdivision regulations for like the home occupation permit. As you know, we got that through, and then we also recently approved the table of uses. So to keep from coming before you several times, we just waited until we had everything wrapped up. So that's what's before you. We've talked about the accessory dwelling unit fee. We've talked about the fireworks stand fee, the floodplain permit fee, and again, the home occupation permit fee. So this is just a request to formalize our fee schedule and to approve this resolution. I will answer any questions that you may have.
I just have one, and that's on the fireworks stand for nonprofits like the project grads and stuff like that that the schools do, but I guess they're typically in the city limits. I believe we have a few that's out in the county.
We have two that are typically out in the county. They are operated by the same organization every year. I am not sure if that is a nonprofit organization or not. If you recall, about a year ago or 6 months ago, we brought forward the updates to the temporary special use permit, and that was one of the things that we had addressed, that nonprofit organizations would be considered the good type of lend.
So a lot of
And then
times
we give
with
that ability to you and your staff to say,
Right.
if
Waive
you're not
those.
for profit, there's no reason to bring it in front of us. We're okay.
I think some of the challenges with the fireworks stands that you find is those are not non-for-profit. A non-for-profit organization provides staffing as fundraising, but the owner of the fireworks stand typically is a for-profit and has multiple fireworks stands.
They probably get volunteers. Those volunteers get a percentage of the sales for their efforts.
Like my kids were in band, and we would provide staffing for 2 fireworks stands, and they provided money to the band organization.
Got it.
They donated money to the band organization, but they were very much for profit. It was just the band provided the staffing.
Okay. That makes sense.
I was just going to make sure that, and I assume the Planning and Zoning Board was all in support.
We don't take the fee schedule to...
Oh, really?
Yeah. We did take the update to the temporary special use permit because that's part of our regulations.
Right.
And yeah, they were in support of that. But as far as fee schedule, that is between.
Else on here.
Okay.
Any other commissioners have any questions of Crystal on this? On the fee schedule? I'll entertain a motion to approve it.
Crystal, I just have one quick question. The floodplain building permit or construction permit from the state is $500, correct? And so we're proposing $100 for that same thing if it's at the county level?
Yeah, theirs is up to $500 depending on the
Okay.
project. But yeah, many municipalities charge a floodplain permit fee. The state charges a floodplain permit fee, as we discussed a few weeks ago. Oftentimes, there's pretty substantial staff time that goes into these. Historically, we have not charged. I think we talked several weeks ago about how one organization, the Next Era project, there was 14 floodplain permits associated with that, and no fee. So, trying to remedy that.
Can we just have a fee where we charge power and utility companies? Can we put that on anywhere?
Franchise fee.
Commissioner Shimke, you could look at a various fee schedule based upon the actual cost of performing these services. As Crystal referenced, the Next Era project, that requires 14 separate flood permits in a rather condensed period of time. puts much more strain on your staff than an individual who would come in and wish to put a pole barn in a floodplain. These fees can be examined at any time. The reason they don't go before the Planning Commission is this is to partially offset the cost of processing these applications. It doesn't really cover the actual cost. It merely supplements that. So in the event that a project were to appear before the county that would require such substantial staff time that it would justify re-examining these fees, you can do so at that time. So,
yeah, I don't have a problem with this. But when you go to enough of these county and state meetings and you hear certain companies or their projects, the county ends up benefiting 7-8 figures from power-related projects. Like, where's ours? So I can't help but always ask if there's a power-related, energy-related, utility-related type project where the benefit is to the county, because at the end of the day, when I want to benefit the residents and consumers, don't get me wrong, but these companies come in, they make a lot of money, and we provide them access, and there's not a lot in it for the county, in my opinion, but they stand to gain substantially. So just had to ask a question.
No, it's a very valid question.
This is Commissioner KAAZ. Crystal, on the floodplain permit fees, is that per permit like per location or per application for the permit?
So each structure has to be permitted individually. So there are oftentimes, like the next era.
That'd be 14 fees.
That would be 14. Yeah, and it was 14 permits. There are a couple of, what is the word that I'm looking for here? Exceptions to that rule, but they would definitely be exceptions. And the next era project certainly isn't the only one. We have up on K5 Highway, right there on the Missouri Highway, we have an asphalt company. We also have a grain facility that they oftentimes are getting floodplain permits, especially since we've had significant flooding. The last couple of years, I have been working with those two companies for about 18 months on a variety of projects. That one of them is the ADM grain elevator. They have a lot of rotten grain that we've been working on figuring out what to do with it. Right now, they've been able to get approval through the state to bury a portion of it. They've hauled it off to farmers and such to put on fields and such. So it's certainly not. I don't want you to think it's just power poles or anything like that. It certainly is not. And then of course, a pole barn, and you would be surprised at how rare we get pole barns, which I'm quite proud of. Typically, we can talk people into putting them outside of the floodplain, which anytime we can do that, that's definitely the route that we want to go if there's a feasible option outside of the floodplain.
Okay. Any other questions of Crystal? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution, I guess it would be.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2020-16 to amend the planning and zoning fee schedule.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? And voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner KAAZ votes aye.
Commissioner STIEBEN votes aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. Have a great one.
See you in a little bit.
All right. Ready for Mr. Knoll?
We have 3 board action items today for Public Works. Do we have a particular order we want to do these in?
4H road stop signs first.
Okay. So the first is a resolution for the placement of stop signs at 155th and 4H Road. Olson was commissioned to do a study at this location and had the proposed stop signs. As you can see, these are regulatory signs and require formal adoption of this resolution to be placed at this location. Didn't know if the board had any questions regarding the recommendations. If
Does anyone have any questions on the stop sign placement at 155th and 4H Road?
This is Commissioner KAAZ. I don't have questions. I just wanted to make it known that I had requested Mark look into that stop sign or placing a stop sign there at that intersection because of the increased traffic on 155th Street.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Does that, just a quick question, does that section of road exist primarily to service a driveway?
That's through road.
I don't believe
4H Road.
It's a through road.
It wouldn't be 155th. It'd be 4H Road, I think is what you're referencing.
Well, I'm just thinking where 4H and 155th intersect.
By the pump station for the water district, is that what you're talking about?
Talking about the short section between the curve and the north-south road?
Yeah, that's what,
Sure,
that's what he's talking about.
I think it's an interesting alignment. It was probably put into place to allow for sight distance issues.
Okay.
Because of the angle that 155th enters into the 4H road that turns on around.
And originally, when the roadway would have been opened in the 1800s, it had been opened along the section line, along that north line there, 4H Road. And so originally, it probably came to that T intersection, and later it was a WPA project or something, that curve was put in.
I mean, there's two access points to the highway. I mean, there should really be one access point to the highway. But
Yeah, these are fairly common.
But there's a building down in the middle.
Right, right.
Where you put it. So.
Okay.
All right, then I'll entertain a motion if there's no further questions.
Motion to approve Resolution 2020-17, establishing placement of stop signs at 4H Road and the intersection of 155th Street.
Have a motion to have a second.
Commissioner KAAZ, second.
All right, have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the placement of the stop sign? Voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner KAAZ votes aye.
Commissioner STIEBEN votes aye.
Okay.
It's like this inherent, internal, anytime you hear stop light, stop sign. And then public safety is number one, but every time I hear stop light, it creates heart palpitation. Got just a few.
Yeah. All right, we're ready for 8.
HP 19 is our next board action item. This is currently a bridge structure that's under design. As a part of that design scope of services, we have to acquire permits to do work within the floodplain. The U.S. Corps of Engineers sends these permit applications out to other organizations, one of those being the Kansas State Historic Preservation Office. Most bridges that you're replacing are going to be old, hopefully at the end of their useful life. Why this structure was identified, it is not listed on either of the historic bridge registries that are available. We researched that extensively. There's only one structure that's currently on a historic registry within Leavenworth County, and that is in the north part of the county. And there's already a new bridge at that location, and the old structure is just sitting next to the new structure. Unfortunately, there is not a application process to get around the requirement, and we cannot get our permit from the Corps of Engineers until we have sufficed the State Historical Preservation Office request. They will not issue that. So we have to do a field investigation of 6 possible bridges that are similar in type and age, provide that data to them, and then we will be able to move forward. In the future, if this is going to be something that comes up, I'm not familiar with this process. I've been part of multiple bridge projects, and never has one that's not on the historic registry spurred this type of review. We made a request to be exempt from that review process, and we're not granted that request, and so we need to fulfill this in order to move forward. If this is going to be something, a new position that's taken by the Historical Preservation Office, it is something that we could write into future contracts as a contingency item in order to not require board action because it's an unforeseen situation. So we're not sure what the difference between this bridge structure and any other typical bridge structure not on the historic registry.
I've never heard of it either. I mean, I've heard of if it was registered, but it's not, and it could be or something.
Yeah, that's basically what they're saying. It's not, but it could be.
Yeah.
And, generally...
I could say something on that, but I'll move on.
I was just curious, are they oftentimes, do they try, over time, have they tried to get bridges on these registries because there's some type of federal matching or there's funds available by doing so? Or is it purely just preservation?
No, it's actually the opposite. It usually increases the cost considerably.
Well, I get that part. If it's going to make it more expensive and there's no, you can't reclaim any of those expenses, I'm surprised why municipalities or governments in general would go forward and trying to put one on.
Oh, no.
Or they're just put on it, they don't have any choice.
They're not being put on by
they're not
government.
applied. Okay.
It's the pursuit of a private constituent that would be
Got it.
getting these things listed.
Okay.
Yeah, and you don't
Fair enough.
go out on your
It's an
own.
extensive process, I believe. But once they're on the historic registry, like the one that we have in the north part of the county, it becomes a cost,
Sure.
fairly costly item for a county.
But this one's not. And
I
we're saying
call it a
could be.
liability, but you can call it a cost.
Commissioner Shimke, you're actually paying money for an agency to not designate it as a historically significant bridge. I would suggest to you we're being charged this because that agency can.
That's awful.
Yeah, but it is, but delaying a project is worse.
Having it be placed on the
Or being placed on
being
the,
placed on the registry would cost way more than what they
Understood.
probably by at least a factor of 10 or 20.
so if you understand, is that your motion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I understand.
I've
Does
never,
anybody have
like I
any
said,
other
I've
thoughts?
never seen one of these before.
I haven't either.
Perhaps this is Commissioner Cobb. Perhaps this is something else that we can add to our list of discussions with our state legislators.
Okay. Sounds good, but in the meantime, we need to move forward, so I'll entertain a motion to approve this. I guess we'll call it a change order?
Yeah. Addendum.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve Wilson & Co. Historical Bridge Supplement to provide historical data on Leavenworth County bridges to acquire USACE permit for HP 19.
Commissioner Cobb, second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Are we going to see these a lot more? Because our
Looks like it.
bridges are getting old. So is this going to be the new norm?
It looks like it.
It's possible. All bridges that are being replaced, unless you're doing a significant,
They're all old.
And 60 years is the magic number?
so it's something that
Sure, it's all 60 years
we've
old.
done. I mean, I've been a part of bridges that were 100 or 100 plus years
Right.
old and were steel truss type structures that were more unique than this, and it's never been an issue in the past if it wasn't listed previously on the historic registry.
I'm assuming because, the age of Leavenworth in general, we're going to have more of this than anybody. Is that fair as a...
We're having 145 bridges?
Yeah.
Yeah. Be where we have to replace the new ones instead of the old ones. Any further discussion on the motion? Then voting?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Cobb votes aye.
Commissioner Stieben votes aye.
All right, thank you.
Who made the motion and second on that?
I made
Vicky
a motion.
second.
Vicky seconded,
Vicky
right?
second, okay.
All right.
All right.
I didn't feel great about it, if that's any.
You didn't have much
I don't think any of us
enthusiasm
did.
on the motion.
I didn't feel great about it myself.
This is Commissioner KAAZ, as long as we still have Bill there. Last night at the City Commission meeting, the Eisenhower Road project was brought up, and I was wondering if you could kind of just, I know it's kind of on the spot, but give us a quick update on that project.
So that project's in nearing final completion of design. Currently, the water line design is being submitted to the Water District. They have already approved the general scope of the project, but as a final step, it's just being provided to them for their inspection. That overall project, bid letting time frame has been in the weekly reports here lately. It is open to discussion in the direction of the board. Currently, it's set in September to allow for all of the cities to be provided copies of the plan sets and to coincide with the end of construction season. So if we do it in September, allow approximately a 45-day window of opportunity, that is something that could help us secure possibly some better pricing. Also, not bidding it in the middle of construction season could be helpful, as a lot of times contractors are looking for the next year's work. Also, if we wait till September, depending on some of these different funds that may become available through any infrastructure bills, as over the next 6 months, there's a possibility that we could apply for some of those funds. I don't know what bills may come available for infrastructure and economic relief packages, but right now that's the kind of time frame that we're looking at. If I'm open to any direction from the board, I haven't received any to date since I've taken this position, so I did not find anything in writing necessarily that provided any direction of when exactly this project was going to commence.
Thank you.
Bill, I'd just follow up. So if the bid letting September, anticipated selection, like, again, remind me how long we give to receive how long the bids, we're accepting bids, and then ultimately we'll make a decision. The plan would be to make that decision in construction season 2021?
No, so we would let the bids, if we were going to do it September 1st, we'd provide 45 days to the bid opening. Since it's such a large project and you'd want to provide a little bit larger window, a lot of times we provide 30 days for a bid from the bid opening date. But we were talking about opening these bids on around October 15th, after which point we can set a notice to proceed date of late winter or midwinter if they wanted to relocate water lines. There is some work outside of the actual travelway that could be done, and then try to set a construction window all through next year.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Knoll, while he's here? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right, E50. We can't forget E58.
He ain't leaving yet.
So if we're ready for the final,
We are ready for the final.
board action item here today. What we have here in front of us is a request for board action. Approximately beginning in January, documents dated January 10th, signed by the contracted construction engineering service provider, MHS. We had previously signed an agreement or a contract with them to provide the inspection services for this structure. This new contract or agreement. Does not change the cost of the project in any way. What it did was clarify some language within the SWIP inspection for the project and who was responsible for what portions of that inspection. And it just never made it back in front of the board for the final board approval. And so today for your consideration is this new agreement. Is there, I don't take any questions regarding that.
It's pretty cut and dried, I think.
I can elaborate. I'll elaborate a little bit on the SWIP inspections. I know there has been concerns regarding SWIP inspections in the past, and so there will be an addendum coming out in the bid documents. We are looking at a KDOT policy currently that holds the contractor accountable for correcting any deficiencies within the erosion control of the SWIP permit within a 7-day period in order to remedy these in a timely fashion. And so that language will come out. This language just gives the inspector the ability to start that process.
Okay. Any other questions? And I'll entertain a motion to approve the updated contract for construction engineering services.
Motion to approve updated contract. Do you have something? No? I thought I heard something.
Did you have a question? No.
Okay.
Just drop the phone.
I make a motion to approve the updated contract for construction engineering services for MHS on E58 bridge replacement project.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner KAAZ, aye.
Commissioner Stieben, aye.
Thank you.
Bill's that other bridge you were talking about on the historical ledger, the Bagley Bridge up there in Stranger Creek?
I have a question for Bill. Is he still there?
Yep.
Yes. Yes, he
Yes,
is.
I am.
Okay, Mr. Stieben. We just talked to the Baser Linwood superintendent, Mr. Howard, about the 158th and K32 study on the stoplight. We sent a letter. He said that the school district would be willing to reinforce that letter or also send the letter. Wondered if we could reach out to them and try to work together on that.
Yes, and if they're going to offer a letter of support for any 158th Street road improvement application, I will also reach out to them on that.
I appreciate that.
And I would assume that portion of what they're looking for in way of support from the county is that their request included a turning lane on Stillwell Road, and so that would be a future county maintenance item, the additional width of that asphalt roadway. So if they were going to make improvements within a county road, they're probably asking the county acknowledge that they will accept the future maintenance of that additional turn lane.
Yeah, and I don't know if those two items need to be connected right now. I'm specifically looking at that stoplight, but yeah, down the road, I'm sure they'll want to have work with us on that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that bridge that's on that historical list that when Jesus was a little baby, that used to be the Linwood Bridge, and they hauled it up here by a mule team. I don't remember the date, but Don Aaron put a
There was a plaque
on it.
We have a
It's
plaque,
got-
unless somebody's taken it for scrap.
It's shot up. I don't know if you can still read it.
Yep.
It doesn't have a deck on it currently.
Yeah, some high school kids built a bonfire on it about 1998, I think. What year did you graduate? Way before that.
Yep. No.
Yeah, all the wood's burned out of it, but the metal's still there.
Yep.
Shame.
Anyways. All right. Well, Thank you.
Thanks,
Mr.
Bill.
Knoll. Have a good day.
Yeah, take care.
We're opening bids on that E58,
May 1.
May 1st.
Yep, and I'll provide in a weekly update the information for that. It'll be via Zoom, I think. It was a portion of the scope of services for the engineers who provide the documents for bid, and they set it up on Zoom. So we will. I'll be opening them via webcam.
I just want to say the project map and the latest schedule that you put out was awesome. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's really great.
We'll have some more information coming out next week, so probably tomorrow.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Bill.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we have,
Commissioner, I believe Steve Jack is on the phone for his portion of the discussions. Steve, are you there?
I am here, yes.
Thank you.
good morning, Steve. How are you today?
I'm okay.
All right.
I'm all right.
Well, go ahead. We're all listening.
All right, great. Yeah, I thought I would go through some of the ramifications of the impact of COVID-19 on LPC and some of the programs we're working with and how we're changing the way we have been obviously working as so many businesses have. Staff's been working from home for the past 4 weeks. Mary is going in at least once a day to the office to check on mail and messages. We are all available by cell phone. If you call our main number, instead of getting an extension, you'll get our cell phone. Lisa and I are talking with businesses on the phone, emailing our stakeholders in businesses, using social media, participating in webinars, conference calls, online GoToMeetings, Skype for business. We held our LCDC board meeting using Zoom last week, and we had really good participation because a lot of people are at home, 25 participants. We created a COVID-19 web page on the LCDC website. If you go to lvcountyed.org, there is a link on our home page. We added information on SBA loan programs, Paycheck Protection Program that Congressman Watkins spoke about earlier. Also, the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, Kansas Department of Commerce programs, including the Hospitality Industry Relief Emergency Fund, HIRE, stay-at-home orders from the county and the state, the essential business information, related links, and PDFs. And so what we wanted to do is to provide a place that we could update every few days as we received updated information. And so we had been updating it oftentimes once or twice a day, sometimes every 2 or 3 days. On March 20, we sent out an email informing recipients of the HIRE loan program to 9 businesses and 9 business organizations. Lisa sent information to Commissioner Culbertson, and we appreciate him reaching out to us on the HIRE program to pass on to Easton businesses. We do know in Leavenworth through, I believe, the Wendy at Main Street, that at least 4 Leavenworth businesses received the HIRE loans before the funds run out. And we would tell folks involved in the hospitality industry to continue to apply, even though there are no funds right now, but there may be down the road, and it shows the state that there is a continual need. We sent out an email to inform folks of the Paycheck Protection Program, which included a flyer from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We sent that out to 110 businesses and 14 local business and government organizations. We're now working with all our banks that sit on our board and hope to have data when the dust settles about how much was loaned and how many businesses locally. We do know that one of our banks that has a Kansas City metro presence told us so far that they've had 900 applications and have loaned $200 million but that is among all their banks in the metro, not just their Leavenworth bank. So we should be able to disaggregate that and find out how much is going to Leavenworth County businesses. We hosted a webinar with the Kansas Commerce Secretary David Toland on March 24th. We invited 280 people, the LCDC board, all our investors, all our elected officials, and appreciated many members of the commission who were on the phone. We also sent it out to about 200 small and large businesses throughout the county, and we had 70 participants, which, according to Commerce, they've done several of these webinars around the state as one of the largest groups participating. We did do our quarterly newsletters. We do each quarter. It went out last week. It did contain business-related information on COVID-19. We sent out an email to announce a small business relief fund in the Kansas City area that's funded by several sources, including AltCap, for businesses with 20 or fewer employees and less than $2.5 million in annual revenue. We sent that to 8 local business organizations, including the Chambers of Commerce for Leavenworth, Lansing, and Basel, the Tonganoxie Business Association, Leavenworth Main Street Program, Grow Leavenworth County, KU's Small Business Development Center. I believe those funds are also, like the Hire program, just about out, if not already complete. Early the first week of April, we sent an email with a link to restaurant worker assistance from the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation to several businesses, and then 9 business and government organizations to get the word out for assistance provided by the National Restaurant Association. And I believe that program is still up and running. And then just a week ago, we sent out an email regarding funding for the arts under the CARES Act. We sent that to 2 businesses and 9 business and government organizations. So we're trying to approach this from a couple different perspectives. One is broadcasting through our website. So anytime we find out updated information, we try to update our COVID-19 webpage, and then we provided lots of one-on-one business assistance. I just got off the phone with a woman in the Linwood area asking about the economic injury disaster loan and her experience with SBA, and I was hoping that I could answer her questions before Mark called. So I appreciate being here today, and we're trying to do both educating the public in general and business community in general, and then working with individual businesses as they have questions. I would say one other thing that you might find interesting. I did yesterday. Typically from the Kansas Department of Labor, we get unemployment rates, as you know, by month, and they typically lag by several weeks, and so we really won't know the official unemployment rate in Leavenworth County for the month ending March, at the end of March. But what KU's done is they've projected an employment rate using initial jobless claims from March 21 to April 4, and preliminary, not seasonally adjusted civilian labor force for February 2020, compared that. And what they've come up with for an unemployment rate, and this would have been not today, April 15th, but 2 weeks ago, Leavenworth was at 6.5%. Again, these are projections. Wyandotte, some of the surrounding counties are higher, 7.9, Johnson 6.6, Douglas 9.4, Shawnee 9.2, Jefferson 7. And actually, Sedgwick and Butler and some county in the south central part of the state are much higher than that. Sedgwick is at 14%. I'm going to guess that Leavenworth is slightly lower than some of our surrounding urban areas because we have fewer service and retail businesses, and certainly more essential businesses with the penitentiary, prison, VA, CMOP, CPAC, VA, as well as the fort. So anyway, so that's what we've been doing. It's been crazy. We've been trying to keep up on things, and as you know, when the government rolls things out, they have a tendency to get the money out, to roll it out, and then change the rules as they go along and tweak it. And so we've been trying to keep up to date and get that information out to Leavenworth County businesses.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Jack?
No, Steve, this is Commissioner Shimke. I wanted to thank you. I've got loads of emails from you, your team. Obviously, want to give the chamber credit as well, and trying to keep everybody educated when there's new information daily, weekly, and it's a very confusing time for business owners. We hear from a lot of them. Last week, I think it was Commissioner KAAZ and myself that were on your Zoom meeting, which I thought went really well, so thank you again for having us on and letting us to share updates. The one question I was going to ask you was to share some of the unemployment statistics, but you beat me to it. I don't know if you've seen more recently anything statewide and or for the U.S. for that matter. If you have any of those things handy, if you don't, no problem. Just thought, given all the different networks you subscribe to, maybe you've seen some of those more recent figures.
I can certainly do that. And one thing I mentioned, I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Shimke. I received that through working on the workforce partnership. Julie Schneider, who runs the 3-county metro area on the Kansas side, job service and workforce partnership programs, sent that information, and I sent it on, I think at your request, someone's request, to all of the commissioners. I believe that information comes out Wednesdays. She crunched those numbers and sent out a comparison that I forwarded last week to you all. I may be getting that. I've requested it from Keeley Weekly, and I can push that out to the commission on Thursday if I receive it tomorrow, and would continue to keep that information flowing your way if that is of interest to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate it.
Anyone else have any questions?
Commissioner Stieben, Steve, thanks for everything you've done. Your organization appreciate it, and especially helping with coordinate some of these people's concerns about unemployment benefits for self-employed. That's been a little bit of an issue, so maybe you could address that a little bit. And then the second question I would have is, has your organization discussed specifically, or do you have plans to discuss some recommendations for specifically additional things maybe that the county government and local government can do when we start to roll back some of these restrictions to kind of grease the skids to help the economy grow?
Sure. I think it's an interesting way that you've approached the question, because even though I can say we have 6.5% unemployment, and even though we know some of our companies, Cereal Ingredients is hiring. Heatron, I believe, has furloughed some people, but their focus on their essential functions is still operating. And so, but we really won't know the impact of all of this on Leavenworth County businesses until after the dust settles. It really feels like that. We're hunkered down, we're connected through emails and social media and the phones, but we really won't know until after everybody pulls out of their homes and sees what kind of devastation it has brought to the business community. But that's something that, in terms of our response how we can help locally is something that clearly we ought to be thinking about now. So I appreciate the heads up on that. The unemployment insurance, obviously, we've had people who've been very frustrated, particularly this week, with trying to get in online. We've told people you can go on the phone. There are two ways to file for unemployment insurance. One is the phone and their call number. The other is through the website. Unfortunately, the website crashed on Monday. It crashed again on Tuesday, I believe. And you've got a 45-year-old mainframe that you're trying to run everything through. It makes it a huge challenge. And so I know that some Kansas Department of Commerce people have been trained, and other people in state government have been retrained. If their job wasn't essential, they're now answering the phones for UI, and we're hopeful that that situation will get better. I would say this, that the EIDL loan program is supposed to be expanded to include sole proprietorships and the moms and pops that maybe before, because it's a legacy program. It's been around for a while. So SBA has opened that program up, but I just got off the phone with a woman from the Linwood area that says she's having real trouble with the EIDL loans. And I believe that's because that advance of up to $10,000 is focused on $1,000 per employee up to a maximum of 10. So if you've got 10 or 20 employees, it works for you. If you've got one, you may be lower on the pecking order. So we're working through that as well.
Any other questions? Well, Steve, thanks for calling in, and if you got any way to help these folks get their unemployment claims filed, it'd be helpful in our area. I know a lot of people are having a lot of trouble trying to get their unemployment. And
absolutely, I appreciate all of you folks. This is a time when we all have to hold together in the same direction. I think we are. So, appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for what you do.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Commissioners, sorry about that. Commissioners, the other person that you'd asked to have call in is Brandon Johannes, the Director of the Chamber of Commerce. I believe is his correct title, and he should be on the line.
Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Doing well.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, if my responses seem slow, it's only because I'm pretty much deaf in one ear, so I'm always behind the curve a little bit. Just really appreciate you for allowing me to call in and give you a report on what the Chamber has been working on. We're certainly working at a deficit. I'm flying solo with no staff support, so I'm doing the work of a whole organization by myself, and it is not without its challenges. But a Chamber of Commerce, particularly in a small community, and I know several of you have heard me say this before, one of the main things a Chamber of Commerce does, one of our main missions, is to build relationships, build connections, keep the community as informed as possible, and try to help put people and businesses in touch with each other so they can survive and thrive. Now, obviously, during a global pandemic, such things are at best challenging. So what the Chamber is doing right now, I feel like our mission is modified to be two-pronged. First and foremost is to inform, to try to share as much information as possible with both chamber members. My priority, of course, has to be chamber members since their dues fund our operation, but of course then the greater community at large. So share as much information as possible, as frequently as is reasonable. But also the way I've termed it, second part of the mission is, for lack of a better term, to be a cheerleader. Those of you who've known me a long time know I tend to be a very optimistic, energetic, extroverted person, and that's a huge part of the Chamber's mission, is to offer support. Ordinarily, that support would be through our various events. It would be through me visiting Chamber members, visiting other businesses to invite them to join the Chamber, become involved. The majority of that, of course, can't do right now. So every Tuesday and Thursday, I put out an informational mass email to our email roster, and I don't want to say produce because there's certainly no production value, but I undertake a broadcast on Facebook Live to report on what the Chamber has going on, try to share what new information we've received, and where possible, if members are interested, then use a portion of the broadcast to feature interested Chamber members. I've reached out kind of en masse and have said, hey, you're here still, you're doing business still. If you want to take the opportunity to remind people that you're here, or tell people what you're doing, or even if members want to reach out and say, hey, we've got your backs, offer messages of support to other members, whatever it takes. I think, so I'm trying very hard to keep everyone as connected as possible, like we normally would. And I've been receiving some pretty positive feedback on my Facebook Live videos. I try to have fun with it. I try to be as optimistic and positive as possible, and just basically try to keep people informed. In a situation like this, in listening to Steve Jack talk, a lot of my information that I help share, I receive from LCDC, because with them being the Economic Development Authority in the county, I oftentimes, almost always, will take my lead on information from them. And so I share information from Steve, as I receive information from other sources like the SBA or from the state of Kansas, of course. I share that information with folks. I am not qualified to offer any sort of financial or economic development advice per se. That's very much Steve's area of expertise. So the other piece of advice I give folks is to reach out to folks like that. Reach out to folks like Steve and his staff, or reach out to their financial advisors, their accountants, etc., so that they can make the best, most informed decisions that they can. And my goal or my plan is to continue trying to inform and maintain these community connections as long as this continues. As long as the Chamber's coffers pay my staff and I and keep the lights on, we'll keep trying to do as best we can to support everyone. And that's the thing that I'm actually particularly proud of, if you don't mind me continuing to drone on for a second. As a local, having lived here my entire life, born and raised, yes, the Chamber being funded by its members, our priority has to be our members first, always. But in times like these, when I do broadcast live, I make it very clear that it is important to support all local business, especially whether they're Chamber members or not. On the tail end of this, if someone decides to join the Chamber, that's great. But in the meantime, I am trying to advocate and be a voice, even for those businesses that are not Chamber members, because if the way it works is everyone's connected whether they realize it or not. The work the Chamber does, particularly on its members' behalf and through its members, does have a positive effect on non-member businesses. Conversely, if non-member businesses, if half the business community folds, so too will chamber members. And so that's the other message that I'm working very hard to share, is that those businesses that are open, that are still offering services, if you have a safe and comfortable way of supporting them, by all means do. That's one of the only ways we're going to come through this. Steve hit the nail on the head, and that is working together, sticking together. We'll come through it. I'm also currently working on the Chamber's annual directory, so that's a project in and of itself. So that's when Mark asked me if I could be available for a call, hey, no problem. I'm going to be at the office taking photos and writing copy for my directory, so it works perfectly for me. So I'm really happy to try to help the commission out and answer any questions you might have. Please feel free to ask me any questions you might have, and I'll try to answer.
Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Johannes?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You can go ahead, Commissioner.
This is Commissioner KAAZ. I don't have a question, but I have kind of a infomercial or whatever. Because one of your members, Ray Strategic Services, has an event this Friday at 10 p.m. It was called the Leadership Webinar, The Importance of Positivity During Crisis. And so I would encourage people to consider attending that webinar.
I will reach out to Ted Davis and get the particulars, and I will share that information in my broadcast tomorrow. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yes, ma'am.
Brandon, this is Mark. Hey, question, what are you hearing as you're talking with your members? What are you hearing about the impact it's having and the ability for them to sustain through it?
One of the things, Mark, that is I think oftentimes unique to a small-town chamber of commerce is our members, they run the gamut with regard to business size, business staff size, you name it. You've got small businesses like Commissioner Shimkey's. You've got Commissioner KAAZ's, family businesses that have been here a long time and have grown. And what I'm hearing is completely in line with that gamut. The smaller businesses are having a harder time with the programs that have been set up to assist them. Some of them have thankfully successfully gotten some assistance. I was talking to Cindy Schulenberg, who owns Tenpenny, the other day. Despite my efforts to drop a few pounds, I told my wife it's very important that we support our local eateries, and so I'm trying to, right now I'm trying to eat out as much as possible. But I talked to Cindy Schulenberg, and thankfully she was able to successfully receive some assistance so that she can continue to pay her staff. There are some folks that, I hate to say it, are looking at closing their doors. We almost lost Merriweather's here in downtown Leavenworth, but they seem to have come up with some plans to keep afloat. What concerns me is when we come out of this, companies like, of course, Walmart, Hallmark, Home Depot, the fast food chains, etc., they're going to be fine. It's the smaller businesses that I'm hearing from, both directly and through the grapevine, that are certainly struggling. Those who have the foresight to try to get a head start, like their staffs are successfully collecting unemployment, or like Cindy Schulenberg, they've successfully managed to get some support. It's not dire yet, by and large, but what I'm hearing more than anything from anyone is the struggle to stay afloat, as well as, like I heard Steve mention, as well as kind of the confusing nature of the processes. I have spoken to some folks who, they filed their paperwork, and within a few days, the money was in their account. I've heard from some other folks who have filed their paperwork, and a week or more later are still sitting there waiting there to see where the money is, or wait for the money to arrive. And what is truly sad is I think with rare exception right now, I don't think anything is going to happen in a really convenient, timely manner. And so one of the messages that I've had to share is try to be patient, try to hang in there. But the reality is they can't, and that's, I found out just a couple of days ago that for whatever reason, when Congress passed the KAAZ Act with regard to the payroll protection plan, for whatever reason, whether intentionally or unintentionally, 501c6 corporations were not included. That means chambers of commerce. So when I said a few minutes ago that as long as our coffers hold out, we'll be here and be fine. But there's no mechanism, at least right now, there's no mechanism should the chamber start to experience difficulty. There's no mechanism for us to seek or receive support. We would have to rely on our members who, in the circle of life right now, themselves are having difficulty. So it's one of those things, and I have to applaud all of you, by the way. I would like to applaud the County Commission and Jamie Miller specifically. It is a time of hard decisions. It is a time of difficult calls to be made. And I applaud the Commission in making the decisions it's made because it's certainly not easy, and it's kind of a lesser of two evils right now. And I really think as long as we continue to stay on top of things and employ the plan, the social distancing plan, the shelter-in-place plan, I think we can get back to life as normal sooner rather than later.
Brandon, this is Commissioner Shimke. It was the same for 501c3s, was it not? I mean, it's non-for-profits in general seem to be largely missed by some of the terms and conditions of that plan. And you may agree with me or maybe have some different thoughts or insights, which I would more than welcome, but a lot of the conversations I've had with different business owners, both in and around Leavenworth or adjacent counties, is this notion of all these funding sources and loan programs. And the reality is, SBA and disaster relief and all these funding vehicles have all been there. They're not necessarily new. It's how quickly they can get the funds into the hands of the people that need it most, and those that are that have the employment and trying to keep staff. And people have to remember that in a lot of those loans, that they have to be repaid, right? So it's not doesn't have near the impact on their business that maybe the CARE Act and the PPP program would allow. I mean, there's just so many small businesses that, while they're trying to do what they can for their staff and or themselves, if they're just one or two independents, the program doesn't replace that income, right? So they're losing thousands of dollars a day, tens of thousands of dollars a day. I know many businesses losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a day under these conditions, because it's not, not every industry and trade can work from home. It's just not how it works. So there's a lot of, obviously, a lot of concern, a lot of fear. Hopefully, to your point, everybody can do what they can to support those local businesses that have been able to stay open and do so responsibly. But no, I think education is key, and if they haven't reached out to their bank or a bank, they need to. Not that I'm discrediting the chamber or discrediting the LCDC. Those are all great tools and resources, but everything that the state and feds have passed, the lending mechanism are the banks. It is the SBA, and regardless of what they tell you, nothing with a bank, nothing with the SBA is ever as fast as you think it will be, and it always involves paperwork. So realize that ahead of time, and to your point, stay vigilant and stay positive, and that's likely to have a big impact on your success as well. So,
and you're absolutely correct, Commissioner Shimke, in that, of course, a lot of these programs have been in place and are in place on a regular basis. I would be very curious on that note. I would be very curious once everyone emerges from this. I would be very curious to find out how many businesses were aware of the services or the resources prior and in fairer weather, and whether or not they'd ever considered taking advantage of them before, or whether or not they needed them before. And the other thing that I will just comment on, at least with regard to the PPP through the KAAZ Act, 501c3 organizations are eligible. They're actually right there on the top of the application. The Leavenworth Main Street program, I believe, is applying for one, for example. They are a C3, whereas the Chamber is a C6. Fortunately, right now, though, it's been my mission since day one to be as fiscally responsible and conservative with our spending at the Chamber. And thankfully, we don't own the building we're in. And when my predecessor sold the building, she used every dime of that to build an emergency reserve. So while I might bellyache about not being able to apply for a PPP loan, we certainly, at the moment, we don't need to. That's just me taking a minute to complain because my wife is tired of hearing me complain.
Any other questions?
This is Commissioner Stieben. I do have a question for you. We're getting a lot of constituents that are reaching out to us, and or at least I am, saying, you know, if something's not done to open the economy within X amount of time, our business is going to fail, and really pushing us on this. And of course, we have to balance the concerns of public health with the concerns of our economy and those kind of things. Has your board had discussions on any of that in terms of projecting out next 30, 60 days, what their preference would be or what their view is?
Not directly with me, insofar as a plan per se. I can tell you that in conversations with my board members, they all they said basically, they continue to say, and we all agree, I feel the same way, with exactly what you said, Commissioner Stieben, and that is it's that tipping point between the public health and knowing that if we can't start reopening larger segments of the local economy, that they really are going to. Several of my board members most of my board members represent small businesses. A couple work for financial institutions, a couple might work for larger businesses, but like our board secretary, day one, she was furloughed from her job. She works for a small business, and sadly enough for her specifically, she worked for Cushing for almost 20 years and lost her job there, segued into her new position with an independent small business here in town, and then was almost immediately furloughed. So they have said essentially the same thing you've said, and with regards to projections, I think no two people, at least on my board, who I've spoken to since we have such an eclectic selection, no two people I think have said the same thing with regard to projections, but they do all agree with exactly what you said. The sooner the better, which is just a fundamental reality. The sooner we can get the economy going again, the better it'll be for everyone, lest we lose local smaller businesses forever.
Thank you.
Yes.
And any other questions for Mr. Johannes? Thank you, Brandon, for calling in and giving us an update.
All right, thank you all. Have a good day. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, Brandon.
Bye-bye.
All right. Okay. Do you have any other business before we adjourn?
We do have a work session topic. I mean, given that our work sessions have to be televised, I don't know that we need to adjourn. We can go right into it if you'd like. But I need to track down the person who's involved in this. So if you might want to take like a 5-minute break so everybody can get up and stretch legs, use the bathroom real quick, I'll go get that person.
Perfect. We'll adjourn for 5 minutes. All right, we're ready to go into our work session. And Crystal, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, all right.
Commissioner
Commissioner KAAZ and Stevens, are you present?
Commissioner KAAZ is present.
Commissioner Stevens present.
Thank you.
Perfect. So obviously, we were unable to have a planning commission meeting in April due to the limitations on number of people in a room. Given the nature of what's going on, looks like the May Planning Commission was also, which is scheduled for May 13th, looks like it may also be in jeopardy of not being able to take place in at least the typical manner. We're trying to figure out a way that we would be able to hold a planning commission meeting, that we would be able to adhere to the Attorney General's guidelines on how to have an open meeting and such. This policy that I have presented to you is based very strongly off recommendations from the Attorney General. It also follows pretty closely what Douglas County is doing, Jefferson County, the City of Lawrence. We did make some tweaks. Douglas County is proposing a Zoom meeting for everybody who wants to be involved, but that seemed like it could maybe get a little overwhelming. Have you all had a chance to look at this? Would you like?
Yes.
Okay.
I've looked at it. Main thing, it satisfies the Attorney General.
I think so. Mr. Van Paris has taken a look at it. Also, Mark has obviously taken a look at it. I believe that it covers all that. I spoke with some officials, like I said, from Douglas County and Johnson County to get their take on it, and it seems like it's in line during unusual circumstances.
Anybody have any questions for Crystal on the public comment policy during while the courthouse is closed on planning and zoning issues?
Hi, Commissioner Stephen, I have one question. Is this policy going to be I don't see any sunset date on this when we would revisit this. Is there would we be looking at revisiting it when the governor's order comes down, or what? How do you see us walking this back?
Commissioner, I think kind of like the policy we adopted earlier in our board meeting, this is specific to the courthouse closure. The language we put in our other policy earlier today, it addressed everything, and then it said, but during times of closures, this additional steps will be taken. This is kind of the same thing. When the courthouse is closed for any reason, let's say there's something else that came up, this policy would stay in place. Otherwise, our normal policy would kick back in once the courthouse is open.
So the mechanism that would trigger this policy would be if the courthouse is closed.
Correct.
By the emergency, by the, well, what do you call your group? You, Janet, and Jamie, or for any other?
Right. For any reason, the courthouse would be closed. This would be the procedures that we would utilize.
But when we do open back up and say start phasing the number of people in, this would still kind of be in effect also, wouldn't it?
I think that some of the really some of the things that have come out of this closure, not just for this topic, but some of the other topics like the policy we discussed earlier, is I think there's some really good practices that we have in here that we can utilize going forward, regardless of the courthouse being open or not. Things like provide all your comments in writing before the meeting so we can be prepared. Offer potentially people to participate via phone if need be, because, again, people could be other locations that need to participate. I think that's good that we're seeing how it works. We're working out some of the kinks. So while this policy may not be in effect when the courthouse opens, there may be some really good practices that we can take from this and apply to all of our meetings going forward.
If we implement this, does this mean everything that's been put on hold gets back on schedule?
So right now, we had 4 cases, I believe, from April that have now been pushed into May, and we have an additional 3 or 4 cases from May. So May will be a pretty hefty planning commission, but right now we feel like we'll be able to. We can get them all in there. Like I said, it'll be a long meeting, but we'd rather do that than continue to push things.
Right. So does the public notices have to start again on some of these?
Yeah, so we would need to re-notify. We also, we may need to, in order to meet that public notification deadline, be looking at moving the planning commission back potentially a week. This is obviously a work session item, so next week, hopefully we can go ahead and get this adopted. But my public notices have to be in the newspaper by next Wednesday. So
we can change the date for the May meeting.
Delay it a week.
Since we haven't sent the public notices out yet. Once we send those public notices out, we're tied to that date. But so we could still have a meeting in May, which is our goal, given the ones that were held over from April and the additional ones being we're starting to back up, and we don't want that to happen if we can avoid it.
Okay.
So this would be in place until the doors open back up. Once the doors open back up, whatever policies or recommendations or guidelines, we'll have to deal with those, whether it's an occupancy thing or, no group larger than, again, you run into some of these instances where even if it's 25, by the time you have a board the size that you do, and then staff plus a dozen people, so we'll just have to manage, I guess.
Well, and that's where
policy for the unknown.
Right, and that's where some of the things we're doing now will come into play, that we can accommodate those groups.
Okay. Any other questions for Crystal?
Okay. We'll put this on next week's agenda then for final approval.
Okay.
Looks good.
I think it looks good. I think it'll meet the needs of what we got coming forward.
I think so.
All right. Well, thank you. Sorry to take up so much of your time today.
I apologize at all.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Commissioner.
Crystal.
Do we have anything else for the board? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Voting? Aye.
Aye.
KAAZ votes aye.
All right.